Hey everyone, this week we're going to talk about how you can remove image noise from your bird photography. So image noise, or grain, is a common problem for bird photographers, and we'll get onto the reasons for why that particular type of photography suffers from it a little bit later. I was going to go out this week and do some bird photography, but unfortunately I've finally succumbed to COVID, so I'm not testing negative yet, so I'm staying at home, I can't go out, and I thought instead I'll do a video on how you can use Lightroom and software to remove that noise, or at least reduce it in post-processing. So first of all, what causes noise? You may have heard that raising your ISO can introduce noise into your image, and while that can be true, it's not the whole picture really. It's a bit more complicated than that, and it's being a little bit too simplistic to just say that raising ISO introduces noise. The best way to think about it is that digital noise is basically always there. It's going to form the background layer of your image, if you like, and what your job is to do as a photographer is to overlay your image onto that background noise with as much information as possible so as to disguise that noise and get rid of it. And that's what's going to give you a sharp, clean image. This is sometimes known as signal to noise ratio, where signal is your image data. And you basically get a better signal by getting more light into your camera to create your image. So you can do this in more than one way. You can use a wider aperture, you can use a longer shutter speed, you can just have better lighting conditions and a brighter scene. And all this will help to reduce the effects of digital noise in your image. If we take a look at this shot of the robin at Padley Gorge, this was actually taken at ISO 3200, so very high really. But it's still quite a detailed image, and there's quite a lot of good signal image data in there, which overpowers the noise in the image, and it doesn't look too bad considering the ISO. I took this at f4 with a shutter speed of 1/100th of a second, which is very slow for bird photography. The subject wasn't moving very much, so I was quite lucky in that respect. And I'm also quite close to the subject, so there's a lot of detail there, and it's come out quite well. On the other hand, sometimes you can take an image in good light with a low ISO, and it can still come out grainy. The main thing is not to underexpose your image and then raise it in post, because if you do that, you're just going to introduce more noise later on. And also your camera and equipment can affect the quality of your image as well. So things primarily like the sensor, the size of it and the quality will affect how much noise is in the image as well. So bird photography is particularly susceptible to noise because of the really high shutter speeds that we need to use to capture a nice clean sharp shot of the birds. They're moving so quickly that you have to use shutter speeds often in excess of 1/2000th of a second. It can go even higher than that. And because you've got such a quick shutter speed, there's not much light getting into the camera there. And because we're using quite huge, long telephoto lenses that are quite expensive to manufacture with wide apertures, often the maximum apertures in those lenses are not particularly wide. So all these factors mean that you have to compensate by raising your ISO to quite high levels to get a good shot. And that is often introducing a lot of noise. Another factor with bird photography is that because we're often quite far away from our subjects, even with telephoto lenses, we don't get the subject very large in our frame, and we have to crop in later. And whenever you crop, that doesn't add more noise, but it does emphasize the noise that you already have. So what can we do about noise? We're going to look now at some techniques in Lightroom and also using some third-party software on how we can help to eliminate or at least reduce the noise and create a better image. Okay, then we're going to start off with this image. I think this is a cold tip, but I'm not 100% sure. As always, if you do know and you want to let everybody else know, put a comment down below and let us know what you think it is. This was taken with my Nikon D7500 with the 70-300mm DX VR lens, and it was at 300mm, f6.3, 1/200th of a second, ISO 640. And ISO 640 is not a lot really, but with the combination of the camera and the lens, the aperture, shutter speed and lighting conditions, it has created a fair bit of noise, which you can see particularly in the big flat areas of the image. So we're going to get rid of that. Now the first thing to note is that I've not changed any of the contrast or presence settings like texture or clarity or dehaze, because they will add sharpening, sort of sharpening as well. And I'm not going to go into those in detail today. What we're really going to be looking at is the sharpening and noise reduction tools down here, mainly the noise reduction tools. So the first thing we're going to do is remove the colour noise. So you will notice that there is some colour noise. We've got the big green area, but in between that we've also got patches of purple and pink and magenta and things. And we can get rid of that quite easily by bringing up the colour slider here under noise reduction. So if we just bring that up, we should start to see that noise disappear. And it's quite easy to get rid of that. I think that looks okay. You can play around with detail and smoothness. To be honest, I usually find they don't do a lot. Detail will try and bring some of the detail back that's lost when getting rid of the colour noise. And smoothness will just smooth out some of the patchiness. So sometimes you get kind of blotchy areas in the big flat areas, and by bringing the smoothness slider up it'll get rid of those. But as you can see, it's not really doing anything in our image. So I'm just going to leave that. So we've got rid of the colour noise, but we do still have some ordinary luminance noise. So we're going to start to get rid of that now. I'm going to go in a little bit closer. If we just bring up the luminance slider until it just starts to smooth out, so round about there, we'll see that's done a nice job of getting rid of the noise, but it has also got rid of some of the detail in our image. If we go back to 400, turn that off, we can see there's quite a lot more detail there, and getting rid of the noise has also got rid of all the sharpness around the details in the eye and the beak and the feathers. So we can bring some of that back by using the detail slider. Now you should be aware that by doing this you will also introduce some of the noise back into the image, but it's not quite as bad as it would be without any noise reduction at all. So I'm going to leave it about there. You can bring up the contrast slider if you're finding that your image is a bit washed out. Sometimes getting rid of noise can get rid of contrast in your image and you need to compensate for that. But again, I find most of the time it's not necessary to use that, so I'm just going to leave that off for now. Okay, so what we're going to do now is bring some of the sharpness back in the details. So I'm going to bring the amount slider up underneath sharpening, just until we get some sharpness back around the eye and the beak and things, and in the feathers. Bear in mind, we zoomed in at 400% here, so it might look a little bit blotchy and not perfect, but if we zoom back out to 100%, it does look quite nice and sharp. And we can also adjust the radius of the sharpening filter. So what that does, basically sharpening will kind of highlight edges and give the edges a little bit more contrast to their surroundings. And what the radius will do is expand the width of that highlighted line. So if you press Alt on your keyboard, you can actually see what that's doing. If we bring it all the way up, it's making really big, thick, highlighted lines. If we bring it down, it's much more refined and subtle. So just play around with it until it looks about right to your eye. Sometimes it's best to go away, come back after half an hour, see if it looks right. And again, you can use the detail slider, which is pretty much the same as a mount, but it kind of adds even more sharpening if you like. But I'm going to leave that around about 38. And I think that's not too bad. If we turn that off, we'll see there's quite a bit of difference there. That's without any noise reduction and sharpening, and that's with it turned on. So it looks quite a bit nicer. The other thing you can do to retain sharpening but get rid of noise is to use the masking function underneath sharpening. So what that will do is basically mask off areas of the sharpening so that it doesn't appear in those areas but still appears in the areas that you want it to. So you can start to raise this and you'll notice that the background there is getting less noisy. And if we hold Option or Alt on the keyboard and then move that slider, we can see exactly what that's doing. And basically the white areas are the areas that are going to get sharpened, and the black areas are what are not going to be sharpened. So the black areas are going to benefit from having all that noise reduced, whilst we still get the nice sharpening in the white areas. So we want to bring it to a point where we're just starting to see white in those big black areas. So probably about there. And now we still get nice sharpening and detail on the bird, but the background looks nice and denoisy. Is that a word? Unnoisy, not noisy. And we can take this a step further and use the selective editing tools. So if we click here, we can choose a brush and we can paint onto our bird like so. And now anything in the red area will get affected by our edits, but nothing else will. So we can come down to sharpness, bring that up, or we can also do things like add clarity or texture. So that's a really powerful way of doing it as well. Just remember not to overdo it. That's probably a little bit over sharpened now, but you get the idea. Keep your background nice and smooth, get rid of that noise, but sharpen your subject. So usually the noise reduction and sharpening tools in Lightroom work pretty well, and I'll use those for the vast majority of my edits. But sometimes an image is just so noisy that you either have to discard it and say it's not good enough, or you have to look for other ways of trying to rescue it. If we take a look at this shot of a kestrel, it's pretty noisy. So this was also taken with the Nikon D7500 and the 70-300mm DxVR lens. And this one was taken at 300mm f8, 1/3200th of a second, so a very fast shutter speed, only ISO 500. And that's because I made a bit of a mistake really. I was working very fast. My main priority was to get the shutter speed really fast so I could capture the motion, not have any blur, and I've done that, so that's good. But I probably should have had the ISO a bit higher. Because the sky was really bright, that was getting blown out, and I think it was confusing me when I was checking the metering and my histogram. And so I didn't have my ISO as high as I probably should. And if I turn off the edits I've got on this, you'll see that the bird is actually a silhouette and really dark. And that's a good example of how using post-processing to bring back the shadows will introduce more noise in an image. So we just turn those shadows down. Bringing that up is what introduces all that noise. So if you can, it's better to use a higher ISO in camera than it is to bring it up in post afterwards, but sometimes that's just what you have to do. So anyway, this is the image that I got, and it's not every day you see a kestrel, so I did want to try and keep it if I could. So what I decided to do was use some third-party software to try and reduce some of that noise. So this is the software I use, which is DxO PureRaw. So you drag your RAW file into this, like so, and then you click Process up here. You've got different options. I usually choose Deep Prime. I think these are just not quite as intense, the algorithms that they use to process the image. but I want to go all out with deep prime. I want my output format as DNG, so it'll still be a raw format that I can edit afterwards, and then you can just choose where it's going to be saved. Click process, and after a few seconds of thinking about that, crunching the numbers, it'll produce a new raw file which has the noise hopefully removed. And it'll give you the option of exporting it to Lightroom as well. So you click on export to Adobe Lightroom Classic, and then you can click export. So here it is back in Lightroom, and now we can start to apply our effects to it, and we'll see it looks a lot better than it did before. It's not perfect. With images that have got so much noise in them, it's never going to be 100% perfect, but you know, for social media or on-screen use, it might just be alright. And I can show you the final image, which I've brightened up. And bear in mind this is zoomed in at 400%. Like I said, if we go to 100%, that doesn't look too bad. If you compare that to the original, quite a difference there. So there we go, that's how you can help to reduce noise in your bird photography using Lightroom or DxO PureRaw. I hope you found the video useful. If you have, please give me a thumbs up down there. And if you're new to the channel and you're not yet subscribed and you'd like to do so, you can also click down there on the big red button or over here on my face. That way you'll keep up to date with everything I'm doing each and every week. There's a new video every Sunday morning, 10 AM UK time. Hopefully I will be testing negative for next week's video, and I'll try and get out. If not, it might be another editing one. I can't guarantee anything, but I hope you'll catch me next week for that one. And until then, cheers everyone, and bye for now.